So very warm welcome, everybody. If you've been attending the summit, so far today, you'll have had Zoe as your host. And so I'm really pleased to meet you. I'm Jo Wheatley, the other half of In Good Company, co-founder with Zoe. And I am delighted to be able to introduce you this morning to Iain Holloway McLean. And he is the founder of IHM Coaching. And today's session is all about aligning your career to your values, which is the journey that Iain has been on himself. So I'm going to hand over to Iain, and I'll be in the background supporting. I hope you all enjoy the session today.
Thank you very much, Jo. Hopefully you can all see me. It's difficult to see whether you're seeing me as a full screen at the moment. That's brilliant. Thank you, Brian. And yeah, welcome to my session. Hopefully you've enjoyed the time that we've had in the first two sessions, some great insights from Marianne and from Barry and Joss. So today, yes, I'm going to be sharing my journey. Now I come from a corporate world. I make no apologies for that, but that does mean that I'm slightly corporately conditioned. So there are some slides here, but I need those slides to be able to create the visuals to help you understand and for me to be able to explain my journey and how important my values were in my journey and potentially how they've varied across my career. If I can just remind everyone, if they can go on mute, that would be great. That said, if you've got any questions or if anything that I say triggers an emotion in you or has, is a trigger, then pop it in the chat. Jo's very kindly going to be monitoring what's in the chat. And then we'll be able to answer those questions either at the end or if it's something that's quite pertinent or quite important, then I'm more than happy to discuss a specific issue halfway through. So with that, I'm going to try with my technological inabilities to share my screen. Let me just see where I am. There we go. And hopefully you can see myself and also my first slide. If I'm spotlighted, that should be the case. That's great. Okay, so moving forward, let's just see what we can do here. Right. So let's start off with the long grass. What do I mean by the long grass? Recently, those in the UK may well have been aware of something called No Mow May. And this was a time when during the month of May, people were encouraged not to grow or not to mow their lawns. So we kept a small corner of our garden and let the long grass grow. And this was quite fitted in with my values quite nicely. It was a good thing to do. It allowed the insects, etc., to pollinate in the wild flowers and the grass, etc. But it also started to continue to grow. And May passed and June came and I still let that grass grow and it grew longer and longer. And then, frankly, to cut a long story short, I finally got it cut around a week ago. But it did start to make me think about, has the grass grown around you and your career? And had it grown around me and my career? And had that hidden anything? Were there any talents that we had that were being hidden by that long grass that had grown? And more importantly, was it the grass that was hiding our talents, or were we hiding our talents behind the grass? And again, starting to challenge myself in that, it's what could be different if our talents were no longer hidden? Could simple, small changes being big value benefits? And again, looking at our values, do our values hold the key? And again, within that grass, you may well have seen right at the beginning, there's my cat there, OJ, hiding in the grass. And it just picturized and visualized to me, the key elements of how much control do we have? Are we hiding or are we hidden? And then what can we do to, I suppose, in that area? in that area, in that area, in that area, in that area. Again, if I can ask people to go on mute, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is share my story. And when we get towards the end of the session, I'm also going to share with you a small model that I've created that helped me, I suppose, explore my values and also try and give me some process to my thought and how I've evolved in aligning my values. So if I go back many, many years, my story started off when I was 18. I started my career as a nurse. I wasn't particularly academic. I scraped through my O-levels. I had a great time during my A-levels, which predominantly meant that there was no way I was going to go to university. But nursing to me really started to connect with my values. It really started to align myself with my core values of nurturing, of caring, of trust, of loyalty. And this, I suppose, started to ignite a passion inside me. And I specialized in both hospice and HIV care. So the nurturing side of me was also not just about bringing people to good health, but it was also about approaching things and enabling dignified deaths as well, but all very much with a positive line of sight. And I look at these years, and these are very much my aspirational years because they were very much connected to those core values of nurturing, loyalty, and trust. As with any profession, you then start to expand, you start to grow. There are opportunities that come to you, and there's opportunities that you make yourself. You know, you have promotions, there are new roles that come about, new locations, and new connections. But also in your personal life, as you grow through the years as well, you're starting to develop new relationships. You may start to have a more solid relationship. You may have a life partner, and you may create a family. And all of these things bring wonderful new dynamics to yourself, and it brings a lot of excitement. And these development years are still very much connected to your values that you have, and they're very much to mine. When I look at my career going through the various levels of hierarchy within nursing, and then also moving into the pharmaceutical sector, these were still very much connected to that nurturing, loyalty elements and trust values that I held so close to me. And therefore, there was that strong golden thread, so to speak, running through my career. And that was particularly healthy for me. What then happens is you then start to become successful. That's not to say that you weren't successful in the past, but I classify these success years as a time when actually your career growth has continued. Hopefully so is your income. But that in turn also adds to your commitments. You may have started a family. You may start to have a house. The bills are increasing. There are more elements that you need to consider in your day-to-day life than potentially you needed to when maybe you were 16 or 18. And you can sometimes find that your career pathway has also started to meander. Those opportunities that came through in the past maybe took you down a direction that maybe originally you hadn't really thought about. And if I certainly look at my career, and I look at the pathways that I went into, from nursing into specialized nursing, then into pharmaceuticals, into marketing, then into clinical research, there was still a thread there, but it was starting to actually meander a little bit away from those core elements that I'd started out on my journey. And you start to negotiate with yourself. You start to think, yes, it's still okay. I'm still connected to my original values. They're still being respected. You're maybe making sacrifices, but I'm maybe making a sacrifice on losing part of my career, but because I'm nurturing for my family, then that still fits in with my values, and that negotiation bit starts to come through. And you're providing for your family, you're being loyal to your employer, you're well respected at work, so there's trust there. So you're able to, in some respects, convince yourself that actually throughout these success years, you're still very much connected to those values. But this also then starts to bring in a new period, which I call the challenge years. And you already start to see the changing color in those arrows from that nice, healthy green to now that slightly fiery danger red. And that's very, very specific and purposeful. I recently mentioned when I was invited to do a podcast with the Coaching Crowd about it's how much we almost sleepwalk during our careers. At some point we wake up and we think, how did I get here specifically? We know every decision that was taken in our journey, but actually, and we've made those choices, but as we wake up, we suddenly realize that original thread and the strength of the connection to our values may be slightly weakened. And you're now in a really quite difficult place where potentially your values are in conflict. And that's certainly my experience of going through my career and then waking up and suddenly thinking, how far away am I from those core values that started off in those aspirational years? I'm good at what I did. People said that, so why would you leave? You've got commitments. If I was to leave a particular role, how would I survive? And as I've mentioned before, my family depended on me. And that very much brings that challenge through and reinforces at times that conflict that you've got with your values. Now, I was very fortunate. I was in a large pharmaceutical company. We went through a major restructure. And at my time in my career, I was given the opportunity to take redundancy. Now, don't get me wrong. It wasn't all, fluffy kittens and smiles. It was quite tough too. And it did hit my core values quite strongly. That loyalty that I'd had for an organization for 20 years was suddenly threatened and challenged. I wondered about trust and things like that. But one element that did come through, certainly when I was exploring how I felt, was how do I look after my team? Now, one thing I haven't mentioned was I actually led global teams. I had individuals within my team across many parts of the world and the organization, and all of us were impacted by this change. And that actually awoke something inside me. That awoke my nurturing value. That enabled me, when I was then talking to my team members individually about how the changes were going to impact them, I was able to ignite my nurturing value and start to really get back to helping others, which was taking me back to those aspirational years. And that gave me a real positive viewpoint in what potentially could be quite a negative experience. Now, don't get me wrong. I appreciate that, we can't, there's no magic wand. We can't just give up our careers and go and do something that we wanted to do 20, 30, 40 years ago. But what we can start to do is to look at what other elements are there in relation to the segments of our lives. How can we reintroduce our values into those different segments and almost strengthen the overall picture as to how we can approach life? So if we're able to reinforce values, maybe in our personal life or on our social lives, etc., will that help then balance what is currently a negative element within your professional life? That then gives you the space and the time and the energy to start looking at how you can then reintroduce those positive value influenced energies into your career to see what you can do to make those changes, either immediately or more longer term. Now, my alignment's taken me back very much to, revisiting my aspirational years. I'm now coaching. I'm now helping others. I'm now exploring things in relation to trust and loyalty. Values are incredibly important to me. And that's the work that I do with many individuals that I work with, to understand their values and how we can help encourage those values to shine, to come out, to actually be the forefront and the driver of everything that they do. Now, I wouldn't suggest that we need to avoid the success years or the development years. I'm still developing, and hopefully my success will continue. And that will mean that you step into the amber areas. But I think one learning for me is very much now being far more aware of that red zone and keeping away from it, looking to see how we can actually continue to flex into the amber and then flex back into the aspirational, to keep that mind, body and soul healthy, and to keep our focus very much aligned back into our values. Now, one of those other elements that I needed to do to be able to do this was to understand myself. And I think not enough time is spent understanding what truly inspires us. What or who does inspire us? What do I know about myself? What are my core values and beliefs? And, you know, this was touched on by our previous speakers, and I know it'll be touched on by Alicia and Vicky tomorrow in their sessions on values. But it is important that we start to truly explore and almost challenge what those core values and beliefs are. Have they changed over time? And this is where things like the values elicitation exercises, values charters, and then beliefs and affirmations start to come through a coaching exercise. And that's certainly helped me. I was very fortunate to be part of Zoe and Joe's coaching course. And that really started to enlighten me in relation to how I needed to maybe explore those values and beliefs far more critically and in greater depth as well. And I think, again, it was important for me to start to understand how my hold on my values was potentially also a negative element. A lot of the time we speak about our values being a positive influence, but what I've also started to understand in relation to—
Now your coffee's ready. Okay.
What I've also been able to understand is how potentially my hold on my values are potentially negative. Are they preventing me from maybe interacting with people that have got great experiences, great knowledge?
What are you going to
but
do?
Maybe those individuals don't have the same immediate values that I have, and because of that, maybe I'm avoiding those individuals because I'm just seeking out similar people to myself. And I think it's important that we do challenge ourselves to recognize that just because somebody has different values to ourselves doesn't make them a better or lesser person to ourselves. And that was something that I've had to, purposely challenge myself to say, okay, what could I be missing? If I avoid interactions with a certain person who has maybe different values to myself, is that healthy? Or, could I potentially learn from them, whether that's to reinforce my values or also to maybe get a different perspective that then enables me to grow further as an individual. And again, it's looking at preferences. Now, that's not just about color or score, or 4 letters or whatever type of journey you go to. But I think it is important that you start to explore what your preferences are. And I did quite a bit of work on that to understand not just what my preferences were, but what my preferences were in relation to how I interact with others. Again, going back to how your hold on values can sometimes be a limiting factor as well as a positive one, and to see how my preferences might facilitate me or hinder me. Now, recently I was on LinkedIn, and again, you see some quite inspiring individuals, and a number of individuals I follow, and there was recently 2 quotes that I noticed, and the first one was from Stephen Bartlett, and he said, and actually it was words unknown, but it was referenced by Stephen. And he said, quitting your job isn't being disloyal to your boss. Sometimes it's the only way to stay loyal to yourself. If work threatens your well-being, leaving is an act of self-preservation. And if work violates your values, quitting is an expression of integrity. And this really resonated with me because it actually raised a fourth value that had almost been hidden for me. And that was integrity. I was able to mow down that grass and actually understand, actually, I've got more than those three values. Integrity was incredibly strong for me. And I think it is important that you start to explore, you know, those statements that are made by an unknown author that was referenced by Stephen. The second one that I found that also resonated with me was from Simon Sinek. And again, the goal is to feel a part of something, not just to play a part in anything. And I would think, you know, I challenge you all to you know, when we sleepwalk through our careers, how many times have we just played a part in anything rather than actually feeling part of something? And I'm sure, you know, if you were to challenge your thoughts and to think back over time, and even now, maybe you may well just be feeling, you know, just be playing a part in anything that's there, rather than truly being connected and feeling a part of something. And when we're feeling a part of something, then I truly believe that actually you're more connected and there's a more chance that our values are going to be involved and at the forefront of our decision making. Now, as I mentioned, I come from corporate. I'm almost corporately conditioned. I need processes, I need models to help me understand things. And actually, that was one of the great benefits that I found and discovered when I started my coaching, is that coaching also, thankfully, is very much reliant on different models, and there's plenty out there. But I needed a model to almost acknowledge that 20 years of corporate conditioning. And what I tried to do was to look at how I could maybe replicate my review of my values in a slightly more systematic approach. And I wanted to create my own process to help me explore how I could continue to realign my values, but more importantly, maybe how this could help you, others, in a similar journey. So first of all, I needed to identify. I needed to look at the situation that I was in. What was it that I was doing? Where am I now? And then also to identify what my aspirations were and what are they now? And taking both of those elements together to understand, do my aspirations fit in with my situation? Now, for those of you of a certain age, you may well remember a group called Primal Scream. They're still around, but they in the 90s had a track called Loaded. And that just starts off with a voice that just says, just what is it that you want to do? And I think that really resonates with me. And I think it's a great direct question, because what was it that I really wanted to do? Just what is it that you want to do? And like I said, you know, the direct question is sometimes the best one. What did I set out to do before? You know, why was that? What was it that had previously caught my attention and had drawn me to it in relation to my aspirations? And were those aspirations still active today? Were they active, or were they hidden in the long grass? Did I need to resurrect them, or do I have new ones? And this takes me to my second part of the model, which is then investigate. And that's very much then investigating the values. What are your values? How do your aspirations fit and connect with your values? And you know, was I consciously aware of what my core values were? And as I've already explained, you know, this is still a growing part. More recently, integrity then became a fourth value that was far more visible to me. It was always there, but it'd been hidden in that long grass. Then investigating my behaviors. It was, how much emphasis do I place on my values? How do they drive my decisions and my behaviors? And again, both positively and negatively. You know, is there a conflict in some respects? what are the influences? What influenced me then? What influences me now? Investigating that in greater depth to truly understand, and also explore how much influence have I truly had in the past. I spoke earlier on about those negotiations that myself about saying, yes, I'm still connected to my values, but I need to do something different. So, how much influence did I have on that? And how much influence do I have in the future as well? And what are the conflicts? I've mentioned these before, but does my hold over my values hold me back? Do I have a conflict? Am I missing those other opportunities and experiences because my values potentially don't match other people's? And then thirdly, I have infer. Now, this is a slightly strange choice of word, but it met my needs in relation to the model. I needed to look for evidence. I needed to understand what is the evidence or reasoning that would help me deduce or to conclude whether my current role, my current situation, my current aspirations were still appropriately aligned to my values. I then needed to also look at that role and situation that I had, and do they mirror and support my values and my beliefs? Or are they still in conflict? Are they different? And then if they are connected and supporting, or even if they're different, what actions do I need to take to either continue to support or potentially realign myself back to those core values? What is it that I can do either within my work segment, my personal segment, my family segment, however many segments you've got? If you look at, say, your wheel of life and you start to explore those different areas that are important to you, what actions and what alignment did I need to perform to enable me to get back on track with my values and beliefs? And this is where I got up with my 3I approach. It was something that enabled me quite simply to identify, to investigate and infer. And that has helped me start to understand better in greater depth how my values have opportunity and strength to guide my career, recognizing that also your career is never ending. Your career is not about just the job or the role that you're performing today. It's your career will continue to move forward, whether it's paid or otherwise. And again, I think we need to explore, what does career mean to us? And what are the values that drive that understanding in relation to aligning your careers to your values and your beliefs? Now, that's quite a quick whistle-stop tour of my experiences. And I'd be very interested to understand whether any of you guys have got any comments or any questions. And just like to spend, say, the next 10 minutes or so just exploring any of those, or maybe going over something that I've discussed earlier on that maybe didn't make sense. Joe, do we have any comments in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
No. Okay.
How are other people exploring? How are you exploring your values in your current roles? So maybe drop into the chat. Those of you on the call now, what are your career values that you're aware of? I know for me, achievement is certainly a value, very important for me. Peace, growth, challenge, they're important values for me. So Vicky's asking, how did you first come up with your core values and how much have they changed over time?
My core values, I don't believe have ever changed. Interestingly, that nurturing, caring for others, the trust element, the loyalty pieces have always been a really strong thread in everything I've done. They've obviously changed in their significance over time, and I've been able to adapt sometimes, to maybe flex them in their priorities. But I think one of the things that I've always been wary of is, making sure that, I think some people have mentioned it already, is ensuring that there's balance there. It's very difficult sometimes to continue to follow your values, especially in nurturing, when it takes you away from the people. If I look at my career in corporate, I very much loved being a team leader. I managed teams for many years, and the best thing that always stimulated me was that interaction with individuals. But as I got higher up in my career, I got more distant from my team members, because there were people within my team that were doing that job for me. And you don't realize that actually that part of that nurturing piece was starting to fade away. But I was convincing myself that that nurturing value was still being driven, because the higher up I went in the company, the better position I had, the more money I had, so to speak. So therefore, I was able to care for my family and my extended family far better. So I almost convinced myself that my nurturing value was still being applied and listened to. But it's not until you wake up and actually realize, well, no, it is, but it's so far distant from where you started out. And I think that's the bit of realignment for me.
Iain, we've got quite a few questions coming through now. So Marjan asks, how do you choose between two values that are conflicting but are of equal importance?
That's a great question. I mean, in my experience, it's understanding more about what the conflict is and understanding where that conflict may be coming from. Is it a conflict that is inherent between the two values, or is it a conflict that is being amplified by your environment or your situation that you're in? Are there other people that are influencing that conflict? And it may not be that the values are in conflict, but in my mind, it's, are the individuals that are connected to each of those values, do they create the conflict? And then it's exploring that. And I think it is difficult sometimes when you do find yourself got two values and they are in conflict. It's then going back and working out what was the first trigger. What was it that you started out to do that created that value in the first place? And how far away are you from that initial desire or that initial driver? And hopefully that helps makes you understand a little bit more.
Lots of positive feedback here, saying that they've loved your presentation, Iain. So Charlie asks, what would you say to a young person in a team who has just found coaching and wants to explore it further? I often find helping and supporting staff internally at my place of work that some individuals feel they aren't worthy or could benefit from coaching as they're just starting out and they see it just for leaders. I appreciate there is a wider cultural point here.
Yeah, I think there is certainly in organizations, coaching is sometimes exclusive to those senior leaders. And don't get me wrong, I actually do believe sometimes that's where the coaching does need to happen, because people have become so far removed from their values and their core drivers that, actually we need to get them to be reintroducing it back into their thought processes. But I think if there is an opportunity with more junior staff, there may not be a corporate objective to have a program. But that doesn't mean to say that leaders themselves can't adopt coaching principles to help lead their teams. There's a big difference in my mind between a good manager and a good leader. And, sometimes the two aren't the same. Certainly in my experience, when I was leading my team, I very much viewed individuals and I tried to take time to explore what each individual's aspirations were, what their values were. And when we created teams, we looked at individuals to see how their differing values may complement each other, because you don't want everyone doing the same thing. So when you're looking at more junior staff, I think the coaching element comes very much from how they are led, what they are being able to see, what behaviors they're seeing, and giving that individual time to understand whether those behaviors are things that they want to adopt or things that they don't want to adopt, and giving them the permission to be themselves. And certainly that's very much where my work's taking me, is to try and align, you know, both senior executives, CEO individuals to their values, but also to help the more junior members who are currently in their aspirational and their development years, as I would call them, and trying to ensure that we can prevent them from getting into the challenge year, you know, because that's actually when, if I'd been given the advice, that would have been the best time to have received it.
And got something here from Andrew. He said, I often wonder whether we state what we think our values should be or what we want them to be. I wonder how best to drill down to our honest, open self. For example, is selfishness potentially a value, or do we always assume they're positive?
Great question, Andrew. I personally would suggest that selfishness used in the right way can be a positive value. For me, it's always come down to the intent. What is the intent of someone, and what are the drivers there? I think, yes, sometimes we do almost signpost our values, and we want to be seen as nurturing, or we want to be seen as loyal. So that's what we put up, and, you know, when we're asked the questions, etc. But maybe your value is financial security. Maybe your value is career progression. And, you know, that's not wrong. It's just different from somebody else's. But again, coming down to the intention, if your value and your strong core value is that financial security and career progression, then as long as your intention is one that doesn't cause any harm and doesn't, you know, create conflict with others, then I still believe that's a really positive value to have, because it speaks to you as an individual. And then that comes down to the authenticity of everybody, making sure that actually what we portray is our true selves. And that can also mean that sometimes we display vulnerability as well. I'm a huge advocate of vulnerability, especially in leadership. Too many times you see leaders who are expected to know the answer. And everyone holds on to every single word that they have. Well, far better sometimes. The most empowering leaders I've had in the past have been ones where they've turned around and gone, I'm struggling today, you know, and suddenly you've broken down those barriers. So I think there's a whole load of different values that can be shared. But going back to your earlier point, you really got to delve deeply and honestly by yourself, and so take some time out and focus on yourself rather than everyone around you.
And Jeanette's asking, what regular good practices do you recommend to ensure we are checking in on ourselves?
I suppose the first question I always ask myself in the morning is, am I happy? It's a very simple question, you know, am I smiling today? And, you know, why am I smiling? Because again, it's more about the why for me as well. What is it that's making me smile today? What is it that's making me happy? What is it then that's stressing me out? Believe me, the last week preparing for this session, stressed out. But again, there was an element of excitement. It was healthy stress. It was an opportunity to share with you all something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Now, not everyone's going to be interested, and that's fine. But I think checking in with yourself, making sure that you are healthy, making sure that you are happy with what's happening around you. And if you're not, then start to explore, are there ways for you to maybe remove yourself, even for 5 minutes, from a situation that isn't positive? Now, that doesn't mean to say that, you know, if your workplace is not positive, you can't just not go into work. But maybe you can find something to do in a coffee break, at a lunch break or something, that refocuses you back to those core values. Is there something you can do in your part-time? I currently volunteer. I'm going to be a Commonwealth Games volunteer at the velodrome, and I'm really excited about that. But it's something, again, that's going to be different, ignites my values, and maybe then balances out the day-to-day stresses and pressures that we all have.
And one final question here for you from Tom. What are the types of situations which trigger people to examine their values, aside from big things like significant career events?
I think if I go back to my sleepwalking analogy, unfortunately, in many occasions, it needs a big event to wake us up. Now, whether that's on a personal side of things, whether it's through changes in family situations, or whether it's a career element, it is, in my mind, it is normally the fact that we have just meandered through our careers. We've almost walked through everything. We're aware of what's happening. We've made the decisions to get ourselves to where we are, but then we suddenly realize, whoa, hold on, what's happening here? So I think it is difficult to understand, how can we keep ourselves aligned to our values? How can we prevent ourselves from sleepwalking? How can we check in? And I don't know whether that answers your question, but it is maybe being more aware, being more self-aware. Can you trigger yourself to examine your values on a regular basis? Touching base with yourself, maybe touching base with your friends, family, asking questions, asking people to, do you see, my values are X, Y, and Z? And then go to a trusted friend or colleague and say, do you see that displayed? And if they're saying, maybe, then maybe that's the trigger that you need to say, okay, what do I need to do differently? What actions do I need to take? What realignment potentially do I need to start introducing as part of that 3I model?
Thank you so much, Iain. That was great. Lots of positive feedback for you here. And I think other types of situations that can trigger people to examine their values are things like conflict at work.
Yeah.
In relationships with, whether that's with a manager or colleague or another stakeholder. Thank you so much for sharing your own model, the 3I approach. And I really love that metaphor of the long grass. Is the grass hiding your values, or are your values hiding in the grass? The great provocation there. Thank you everybody for joining Iain's session. Next up will be Debbie Broadhurst with her session. That's going to be another great one, I'm sure.
That will be good.
Iain, how can people connect with you? So if they think, I'd like to chat to Iain or explore some things with him, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in exploring more, then I'm on LinkedIn. Hopefully you can still see the slide. So just search for Iain Holloway McLean on LinkedIn. More than happy to connect, and we can have a discussion about your values, about your career and alignment, and maybe how I can help you through coaching. Also, my email's there, ihmcoaching@gmail.com. And again, if you want to just take some time out and listen to a podcast, then if you go to the Coaching Crowd podcast, episode 38, a few weeks ago, I had a great conversation with Zoe, and very much touch base on a number of things that I've discussed today. But yeah, please reach out, please connect. Love to speak to you, and see what you're going through as well, because it's always good to learn from each other in these situations. So thank you for listening, everyone.